Hello and greetings everyone, Darth Boreas here. Now today I want to talk about a topic that is a little bit controversial. And that is basically speaking the fandom, Feloni, Lucas and Disney. Now the whole issue starts basically with George Lucas. And the fans often rejected some things that he introduced to Star Wars. I may have heard of the big blunders of George, and I think one of the reasons he sold to Disney and sold Star Wars and kinda didn't do the third trilogy that he has planned is because of fan backlash. Now, first of all, it's completely normal that you can't please everyone. It's completely normal that some people will hate what you do. It's very normal to have haters. It's very normal to have a small percentage of your viewers, your listeners, whatever, to not like most of the things that you do. That just is a thing. You kinda have to accept that some people will not like what you do. That's always the case with creative works. Some like one or two things that you did really much and hate every deviation from that. That happens a lot across entertainment. That's just how things are. Some people like something super specific from your work and hate everything else. That happens. Some demand and wish that you do one thing and expand on that one thing and ignore the entire rest. That happens. Ultimately, if you're creative, that's something you have to to deal with. That's same for politicians. That's same for any profession really. No matter how good you are at your job, someone will complain about it. Some people just like complaining, but that's not what I'm talking about. Because there's a difference between a few individuals saying something and a majority of your customers saying something. Because the customers are the people that you should care about. They are the ones that give you money. They are the ones that make you basically who you are in entertainment. Without your customers, without your fans, you don't get money, you don't get a big name, you don't get recognition, you don't build a brand, you don't sell merch, you don't get a new generation or new fans from word of mouth, you don't get fan works, you don't get a good reputation. Without fans, you're really nothing. So pleasing the fandom at large should be a priority for any person making entertainment. That goes for video games, that goes for movies, that goes for books, whatever. If you have a franchise that spans across media, you should make sure that the majority of the fans will like what you do. And if you do a survey of something, realize that people will not like the majority won't like something that you do, then you probably shouldn't do it. We have had this with a whole of upgrading things for a modern audience or remakes that aren't really remakes, just censorship updates. We have had a lot of woke stuff ham-fisted into franchises where it doesn't belong and has no place or no in-game explanation, and the results were, quite frankly, those franchises tanked. They hit rock bottom, went through that and found the cellar beneath rock bottom. That happened a lot in the last decade or so, actually a little bit more than the last decade. And that's because people forget what the fans want from the product, the customers want from the product, and that's something no industry can afford. If you open an Italian restaurant and then hire Chinese chefs making Mexican food, your customers won't be pleased. Maybe it's even good food, maybe it's good chefs, but you are selling Italian food, and that's what the restaurant became known for, and so on and so forth. And if you then just switch the menu, people will stop going there, because why should they? That's what they were looking for isn't there anymore. Now, in most entertainment, people look for escapism and just getting away from the real world, and they love to have a fantasy universe that makes them think about what ifs in that world. Now, with that out of the way, here is the problem number one. Escapism happens when you can blend out that whatever is happening in world is tied to the real world, even though the real world is clearly an inspiration for events. As example, the entirety of Game of Thrones was basically based on the War of Roses. You had the first trilogy of Star Wars, the original trilogy based on the Vietnam War and so on and so forth, but you didn't really notice that. Like, there were some hints that you could get, oh yeah, maybe, but even if you knew, you didn't really feel it, so that's kind of fine. Having real world stereotypes in a world where it doesn't belong is weird and kind of destroys the escapism. Same goes for modern language and stuff like that, which Marvel recently learned. Now back to George. George has made some decisions that made a big part of the fandom angry. I think the biggest one was the introduction of midichlorians, because midichlorians created an unbelievable amount of plot holes and directly contradicted things that have already happened in the Star Wars universe up to that point. And fans hated the idea of midichlorians because, well, they love the Force being mystical, they love the Force being magical, unpredictable. And now with midichlorians, suddenly it was a science in a otherwise not very scientific universe. That sounded weird, and most people hate the inclusion of midichlorians because it came like 3 to 4 decades, 3 decades after the original Star Wars was out and all of the fan works were done and all of the expanded universe stuff was done, like all the books and video games and everything that ignored the midichlorians because they didn't even exist back then. And now the midichlorians come in and create conflict and contradictions and plot holes with other material because it directly contradicts that material. And since the way the canon works in Star Wars, whatever George says trumps everything else. And so basically George, with the decision to make midichlorians a thing, kinda erased 3 decades of world building just because he wanted to. And that's what I mean when you ham-fist something in without asking the fandom, or don't feeling the fandom, or not knowing what your fans want, because the fans love the Force being a mystical energy. That's what people liked. And making it into, oh, there is these tiny things living inside your cells, yada yada yada, big issue. Also, the explanation what midichlorians are is kind of faulty regarding science, because cells already are the smallest living organisms in existence, and now there's even smaller living cells inside cells. How does that work? Exactly, it doesn't. And George also wanted to do a trilogy that focuses and introduces on the Wills being even smaller living creatures that live inside the midichlorians, which contradicts some stuff that we knew about midichlorians, because if the Wills are the thing giving you power in the Force, then your midichlorian count shouldn't really matter, should it? Because what really would count is your will amount. So it kind of destroys the whole thing with Anakin and stuff like that. So that was one big issue that George had. Another big problem that George created was the fact that he said that Luke Skywalker, his self-insert, if you like, and don't get me wrong, self-inserts are fine if you do them right. And there is a point at which it starts getting fishy. As example, George R. R. Martin made damn it, what was his name? The fat guy. I blank on the name. Yeah, that guy was his self-insert. And for most of the series, it didn't really shine through, and it was okay. It was a cool character until the end, where he becomes the Grandmaster and Maester, or they pronounce it, and so on and so forth. It became quite apparent, and the ending was just horrible. And so similarly, George said that Luke Skywalker, his self-insert character, is the most powerful being in the existence of Star Wars, the most powerful Jedi / whatever Force user that ever existed or ever will exist. And that's a problem, because not only does this statement completely contradict what we have seen in prior works, but it also makes it impossible to improve upon that in future works. That's a big issue, because now you you kind of put a lid on how far the Star Wars franchise can go, how far the universe can go. You limit creativity, and most importantly, you directly contradict the material that already existed to this point. If you look at the Legends material, the expanded universe material, we had creatures like literal gods, as in the Celestials, that created black holes, that created the galaxy, that artificially created life, that were capable of creating mystical forces. Nakash was the guy who created the dark side of the Force. So these people were all clearly leagues above Luke Skywalker in power. Now they don't exist anymore because George said so. Weird. Also, the whole Rakatan Empire. I bet there were many Rakatans that were leagues above Luke in power level. They now somehow don't exist when they are one of the most fundamental things building up the entire franchise. Like, those guys built the predecessors for lightsabers and stuff like that. And this statement is so damaging because not only does it erase everything that came before, it kinda also erases the things after Luke. And there's so many things that I want to say here, like Darth Nihilus, like Valkorion, like Naga Sadow, like Tula Kord. All of these great characters that were so immensely powerful are now suddenly weaker than Luke, who doesn't have a fraction of their powers because George said so. Doesn't add up, and the fandom hated that statement pretty much as I do, because it kind of ruins the creativity, it kind of ruins the point of telling stories. Now, I'm not saying that every character should be as powerful as Luke, definitely not. I'm also not saying that Luke can't become super powerful, because in canon, in franchise, Luke became pretty darn powerful with age. When he got to Grandmaster level, he was really powerful, and he was definitely the most powerful Jedi that George created, but he definitely was not the most powerful Jedi ever. I'd say there is quite some that were more powerful, like Battlemaster Hoth, like what's the name, Satil Shan, Mitra Zurek. I'd say they were all more powerful than Luke. Cal Kestis is arguably more powerful than Luke with Force Freeze alone. So, difficult topic, really difficult topic. I'd even say Kyle Katarn could beat Luke Skywalker in a duel, and depending on the games that you played, he actually did. So, difficult statement to say that it is so when it clearly is not so. You have other characters like Mara Jade that were able to beat Luke in a duel. So how can Luke be this insanely powerful being when he's clearly beaten by a lot of others, even in his own time? The other problem with that is that it was said that Sidious was the most powerful being to ever exist, and now it's Luke. So Sidious is on the same level as Luke, because Luke didn't stand a chance against Sidious back in the day. I mean, to be fair, Luke learned a lot of his power later on, but now it's conflicting with things that George himself said. Also, it's conflicting with Darth Vader's story, because it was said that Darth Vader is the most powerful, blah, 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 blah. And now that's not true because Luke is more powerful. How so? Because Vader was created directly by the Force itself, which explains his insane midichlorian count. Luke's mom wasn't all that Force sensitive and powerful in the Force. So how exactly is Luke turning out to be more powerful than Vader? That doesn't add up with the midichlorians at all, because he can't have Anakin's midichlorian count, so he can't have Anakin's potential, and so he can't beat Anakin power-wise, yet it's said that he does. Why? Where's the explanation for that? That's a conflict, that's a contradiction, that's a problem. Also, if you go with Feloni's work to do the circle, to complete the circle, Feloni said that, well, Anakin is not only the chosen one, but that he is also the most powerful being ever, and gave Darth Vader an arc where he became a literal god of Mortis, like the god of balance. A god. I guess we can all agree that gods are definitely more powerful than Luke Skywalker. You have the old Mortis gods with the daughter, the son, and the father, who are all clearly more powerful than Luke. They don't count. They are also on the TV, and George helped create them. So is this now George contradicting George once again? Weird that. And now Disney comes in and says that Rey is the most powerful ever, which directly contradicts George's statement about Luke and makes Luke into basically a joke with not all that much power. That's a contradiction directly against what George said. That's directly a canon violation. And the thing that Disney did is saying that, you know what, everything but the movies doesn't count anymore. And so only what Disney says is canon, which clearly not only ruins by this time 5 decades of world building done by other people, but it also ruins most of what George did and said and wrote. And it also creates huge conflicts because it's not even true with only the 6 movies that came before, because they are contradicted by Disney's works as well. So it's just a huge mess of conflicting material now, and all because of one problem that permeates franchises, and that's something that I'd call not respecting other people's work. And there is some part of me that can understand. If you are a new writer for World of Warcraft, a game that has a 4-decade, I mean with the World of Warcraft franchise, a 4-decade history, do you want to read up on all of that to make sure you don't violate any prior works? No, you don't. You just do your thing and don't care if it violates pre-existing material. Okay, if you write for Star Wars and come in and write for Disney, you ignore 5 decades of world building because it's kinda unfeasible to expect you to read up on all of that. To some degree I do understand, because just to read up on all of that material you basically need to pay someone full time for about a decade, I guess, before they can actually do their work properly. So I understand that part, that a company doesn't want to do that. I understand that people who are professional writers don't want to have their entire careers just on one project. I understand that. Deep inside, like the human person in me understands that for many people this is a job, and if you do a job you can't be expected to have your entire life circle around the job. I get that. What I do not understand is why you hire people for such big projects that don't have the prior knowledge. Like Star Wars is probably the biggest entertainment franchise in human history, and there is hundreds of fans that have seen all the material, all the video games, all the books, all the comics, all the movies, all the TV shows, who have writing credentials and have written fan art, fan-made works that are beloved amongst the fans. Why don't you just hire them to do the writing? Because they bring all the prior knowledge with them already. They don't have to spend time reading up on things and catching up to do, because they already know all of that stuff. Maybe they are not as highly decorated writers as, say, Feloni, but they certainly could do a much better job, and probably for much less money too. Why not just go for the people that have their heart's blood poured into the franchise, who live that franchise, who love that franchise, and give them the job so that they can properly continue the work? Big problem that many Star Wars writers, as well as writers for other franchises, have is that they don't want to put in the work to catch up to what's happening in the franchise, and they just ham-fist their own thing, their own vision in it. Doesn't matter if it fits. Great example is the second movie in the sequel trilogy, where first you had Abrams doing the first movie, and the first movie in the sequel trilogy wasn't good, but it had potential. It built up something that should have been cleared up and clarified in the second movie. The second movie got a different guy in charge who had absolutely no interest in continuing anything that Abrams did, and that was one movie that you could have watched and continued the storylines with. He even got the outlines that Abrams created, and he said, well, don't need that, threw it away, and did his own thing. And that messed up the story completely. Whatever interesting plot point was built up in the first movie was absolutely annihilated by an abysmal second movie. And then the third movie came along and they switched out the directors again. And now they put Abrams back in charge, who now had to clean up the mess. And he didn't really try to continue what I blank on the name, what the troll did basically. He just said, you know what, I'll just gonna continue what I built up in the first movie and don't care what happened in the second movie. To me, the second movie doesn't exist, I just continue, and made the mess even bigger because now nothing made sense anymore. And that's just creating such issues, and that's why I hate people who take on franchises instead of creating their own and then not respecting what came before. We had that with Wizards of the Coast, we had that in Warhammer, we had that in so many franchises. If you continue a franchise that you have not created yourself, or where other people also created stuff, you have to respect that, because the fans do. The fans love what other people created. The fans love what came before. And you are punching your customers right in the face by ignoring these things. You are hurting them. You're making them angry by ignoring what they love. And just do your own thing. Don't care what the fandom wants. Don't care what the customer expects. You just punch in there and you do your thing and you don't care. If that's your attitude, go do your own story. Go do your own franchise. Start your own thing. I respect that. Because then it's really your thing and people may like it or not, but you can't ruin something else. If I buy a house and it's completely my own house and I decide to burn it down, well, that's my decision. I burn it down. Okay, my loss, my problem. If I go and put other people's homes on fire, I'll be arrested and spend the rest of my life in jail, because that's not something you can do. However, somehow in entertainment, that's fine. You can ruin things that millions of people love. You can burn billions of dollars worth in sales and merch and whatnot, and not get any punishment. You don't even get fired. I don't understand that. You know, if a waiter drops a glass, it's usually coming out of his paycheck. If you ruin a franchise and diminish its profitability by, I don't know, $2 billion, there is no punishment, nothing. You don't even have to pay back your paycheck or something. Nothing. Just whatever. Yeah, shit happens. That's the attitude. I think that there should be repercussions that are more severe than just getting fired, because you are damaging a brand and create big problems financially for investors and other people. And that's not an honest mistake. You know, if you make an honest mistake, fine. But this is malign. This is just evil. That is just, you know what you're doing it anyway, you don't care what the result is. That's irresponsible and that is supposed to be punished. Now, back to the fandom. Now, in the fandom, the fans usually agree on a lot of things. Now, the fandom is split on some things, but the majority of the fans usually is more or less of one opinion about certain things. In Star Wars, as example, it's widely accepted that Luke is not the most powerful character ever, because there have been many characters before Luke that were more powerful. There have been characters after Luke that were more powerful. So whatever George said Luke is, doesn't hold up with the creations of other people. Same for midichlorians and the Wills. They create so many problems that many fans just ignore to accept them because they just cause problems. Same for what Feloni often did in his works, because he completely disregarded what other people did before him, and that's just creating more issues and more problems. You can't just retroactively change what has happened over the last few decades just because you are too lazy to read up on it. No, in science, people have to do that too. If you go into any science, you have to read up on and learn on things that are 2000 years back in the past. You have to learn things that people 500 years ago found out, and you have to build on that. You can't just ignore their findings. You can't just say, well, it's not my thing, so I'm not using it. No, you have to. You have to. That's what you do in sciences. That's what you do in other areas of expertise as well. You can't just ignore what other people did before you. You have to learn what other people did before you and then build on that. And if you can create your own thing on top and add to it, you will actually get a lot of applause. You will get probably prizes. You will probably get a PhD. You will get a lot of recognition for doing that. But what you cannot do is ignore what came before and just do whatever you like. That's not how things work. That's not how it's supposed to go. And we see that in all of the entertainment where this happens, sales tank, money dries up, and people get fired because ultimately the people are speaking. Ultimately, it's the people that make or break a franchise. It's the customers that decide what's good and what is not. It's the fans that make you rich or poor, and you should really listen to them and really cater to them. So that goes for George, that goes for Feloni, that goes for Disney. You can't just erase 5 decades of world building. And with Disney it's extra hilarious because Disney said that nothing but the original 6 movies count, and then proceeded to introduce more and more characters and stories from the now Legends stuff into their own products because they realized that they don't have anything and they need the old stuff. The problem with that is that they don't just create on the old stuff and create new things based on the old stuff. They are taking the old stuff and instead of doing it right and as it was and beloved, they just change it, do a full 180 on it and just ruin the characters like they did with Luke. That's not Legends Luke. That's not at all what Luke Skywalker was supposed to be or become, or what he, better said, what he actually is for the fans and what he actually was for 4 decades. That's not that Luke, and they ruined it. And the next problem is if you try to go back to older material and recreate those stories and to change them, you destroy everything that is built upon that. Like Disney, what Disney did with the whole new sequel trilogy ignores that the Yu-Sang Wong ever happened. And now you can't bring them in because this entire story is now ruined. It ignores that Luke was married. And now you can't bring Mara Jade in. Now you can't bring Kyle Katarn in. Now you can't do 90% of the Legends material anymore because you decided to make a version of Luke that is so far removed from his original self that all stories based on that vanish and can't be told anymore unless you change them completely too, which fans will hate even more. So very bad decision, and not respecting what came before is just such a stupid way to do things, and more importantly it's such an unnecessary thing to do things. Like if you are a writer and you don't want to read up on 5 decades of world building, maybe you don't need to. Maybe you can tell a story that continues 1 or 2 characters' arcs and you build upon that, or you create your own new story based in a certain time frame of Star Wars. Then you only have to read up on that and you can ignore everything after that because that won't play any role in your story. So that's just a thing. And I think the worst thing Disney did was when Kathleen Kennedy came out and said that there was no source material to adapt, when there was 5 frigging decades of source material to adapt. And if you had adapted these, you'd be rich, and probably Star Wars would be bigger than ever before. And the by far most profitable franchise on the planet. You didn't do that. You said, oh, there is no material, so we have to make everything up ourselves. No, there absolutely was material, great material even. Anyway, the second problem was the whole force is female thing. The force is the force. Why would you even have a need to give it any sex or gender? It's pointless. Is a vacuum male or female? Is electricity male or female? It's neither. It's a stupid question. It doesn't reproduce. There is no point in any of this. And the sad thing is that so many franchises spat on the strong female characters that came before. You have that in Star Trek, where they said that, what's her name, Michael, I think, the black woman, that she is the first female commanding officer. They're completely ignoring Captain Janeway and all the many female commanders that have become before. That she is the first black person in Star. What about Cisco? You know, same for so many other franchises, including Star Wars, with Rey being the first girl boss. Have you seen the original trilogy? Have you realized that Leia rescued Han and Luke much more often than they rescued her? Have you realized that Leia is the big brain of the three, that without her nothing would have worked out, that she is the leader of the rebellion? Have you stopped to figure that out, or were just focused that there was one part of her life where she was enslaved in a sexy outfit? Is that all that you see to her character? What about Mara Jade? If you wanted to have a great strong female character, Mara Jade was stronger than Luke, arguably. She was fantastic. Why do you not mention her more often? What about Mon Mothma, who was the military leader of the Rebel Alliance? What about that? What about all the strong female Jedi from the past, like Satil Shawn, as example, who I think is still the strongest Jedi to ever exist? No mention. Why not tell her story? Why not go for Darth Treya, who was probably the wisest person in all of Star Wars, with the best understanding of the Force in all of Star Wars? Why not go with her? She has an amazing story. No interest? No? Seriously? Okay, fine. What about Mother Talzin? That would have been a great story. I mean, Feloni kinda told that already, but you could have gone into more detail there. Mother Talzin was almost on Palpatine's level. She was pretty strong in the Force, and she wasn't a Sith, so that would be a cool new angle. I'm sorry that this is so much ranting now, but I'm just really angry that companies keep ignoring what the fans want. And the sad part is that there's other franchises that exactly do what fans want, and they blow up because people love it when companies take them serious and value them. Customer is king is a very old saying, and I don't get why so many companies forget that. May it be Bethesda or Ubisoft or whatever, in gaming this is more apparent than anywhere else, because gaming has so much opportunities for small creators. Like, one of the biggest games of all time is Minecraft. It didn't need fancy graphics, it didn't need a insanely orchestrated soundtrack, it didn't need cinematics in high quality, it didn't need insanely difficult complex gameplay or skill trees, it didn't need any, I don't know what Bethesda things like insane open world and whatnot, and this and that and NPCs. It didn't need any of that. It was just a cool game that respected what it was good at and catered to its fans. Bam. And so many other games do that as well. I'm pretty sure that Grim Dawn is going to blow up soon with the near release of Fangs of Azkaban, because Grim Dawn has always catered to its fans so far, and while it's certainly not the best ARPG out there, it's pretty solid, and it brings out I don't know how many years it has been, I think over a decade, it brings out a new DLC and people love it. Why? Because it's catering to the fans. That's all people want. Just give them what they're asking for. Which brings me back to Star Wars. and the whole fandom idea. Now there's three types of fans in Star Wars usually. One are the George fanatics that think that everything that George says is true and George is Jesus and George's word beats everything else. Okay, fine, I understand he's the creator, but the thing is he's not the sole creator. And I so hate it when George doesn't give a flying F about what others wrote, because he would be so much more beloved if he just incorporated other people's ideas and built on that. But as things are, it usually turns out that there's 3 decades of world building without George. George comes in and says, fuck that, I'll do whatever I want, and if your story conflicts with mine, yours is garbage and not canon. Very bad way to do this. Did he have the rights to do so? Yes, just as Disney now has the rights to undo whatever George said and did. I don't think that's good practice. Then there are the fans that say, F George, whatever he says is garbage, we don't want to hear anything from that guy because he has no clue about Star Wars, which seems ironic to people who may not know Star Wars, but yeah, I'd say about 95% of Star Wars material did not have George involved in its creation. So okay, yeah. And then there's the more reasonable people that try to find a sort of middle ground between those two. But all of them kind of agree that there are some things George did that were bad, there's some things Feloni did were bad, and that a lot of things that Disney did were super bad and creating more problems. And the fandom is really good at trying to come up with theories and stories and explanations on how to solve conflicts and contradictions. And some of these were really, really needless and didn't have to happen. That said, I guess I'm gonna end it here because this is going on way too long. If I have any more things to say about this, I will do in a future video. Have a fantastic day, and may the force be with you.